Washington has finally crossed a line the world hoped it never would. Even after the much-hyped meeting between Trump and Shei, a moment that was supposed to ease global tensions, the US took an unexpected and explosive turn. Overnight, America unleashed a 145% tariff on Chinese imports, and within hours, global markets froze. Traders, investors, and governments alike held their breath. This wasn't a display of confidence. It was a move born out of panic. For months, Washington's grip on global trade has been slipping. Supply chains are breaking apart, allies are hesitating, and every diplomatic threat seems to carry less weight than before. Inside the administration, frustration is boiling over. Reports suggest that top officials are already discussing an even deadlier escalation, tariffs as high as 500% if Beijing refuses to yield. But China's silence doesn't mean it's backing down. Far from it. Behind closed doors in Beijing, a much more powerful counterattack is being prepared. One that doesn't rely on tariffs at all. China is quietly arming itself with a weapon far more devastating than taxes on goods. Rare earth metals, the silent force behind the modern world. These are the materials that power everything. Smartphones, electric cars, fighter jets, satellites, even the green energy revolution itself. And nearly half of the planet's supply lies under China's soil. The moment that supply is restricted, the global economy begins to shudder. Meanwhile in Washington, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is racing against time. He's on the phone with world leaders, trying to form what he calls an anti-China coalition. But the truth is, even America's closest allies are chained to China's resources. Europe, Japan, South Korea. All of them depend heavily on the same rare earth elements that flow through Beijing's hands. Investors have already sensed the danger. They're pulling money out of risky assets and running towards safety. Gold prices have exploded, smashing records to reach over $4,200 per ounce, the highest level in history. Every move now feels like a spark that could ignite something much bigger. Something that might rewrite global trade and shift the balance of power entirely. Trump's sudden midnight tariff order, signed without Congress, was presented as a heroic act to protect American jobs. But the numbers tell another story. Last year alone, the US imported $427 billion worth of goods from China. Chips, batteries, medical supplies, and more. Now, almost all of it is trapped behind a wall of tariffs. Within days, supply lines began collapsing. Shipping companies stopped deliveries. Factories in California and Texas sounded the alarm about rising costs. Retail giants like Walmart and Home Depot quietly raised prices to stay afloat. Economists at Goldman Sachs warn that these new tariffs could add 0.6% to inflation, hitting ordinary Americans long before manufacturers can adjust. And it doesn't stop there. Washington's allies are beginning to panic too. Their industries rely on Chinese-made components that flow through US ports. What started as a trade war could soon become an economic earthquake. In Beijing, the tone shifted fast. The Ministry of Commerce condemned Washington's move as economic sabotage. But instead of reacting with equal force, China chose a smarter, sharper counterpunch to strike where America is most vulnerable. Rare earths. With control over almost half of global reserves and about 90% of the world's refining capacity, Beijing holds the keys to the high-tech world. Without China's materials, America's defense systems, electric vehicles, and tech giants could grind to a halt. US officials talk big about rebuilding domestic mining, but experts agree. That's a fantasy that would take decades and trillions of dollars to achieve. In reality, these tariffs cut both ways. What was supposed to be a show of dominance is now turning into a race against time, as Beijing weaponizes the very minerals that keep modern civilization running. This unfolding drama exposes what the markets have whispered for years, that Washington's leverage is crumbling, while Beijing's quiet power runs far deeper than most realize. And that power isn't military or political. It's buried in the earth. 17 elements, each with strange names, but together they form the backbone of our digital age, powering smartphones, wind turbines, electric vehicles, and even missiles. China's dominance over these materials is absolute. It doesn't just control the supply, it owns the process. Nearly 90% of global refining happens in Chinese factories, built over decades while other nations abandoned their own production due to cost and pollution. Now those long-term investments have turned into geopolitical leverage. The European Union's data paints a clear picture. Germany gets 91% of its rare earths from China, the UK 89%, South Korea 80%, Japan 58%. And despite all the talk of independence, the US still depends on China for more than 70% of its rare earth supply, either directly or through third-party nations. So as this new economic war unfolds, one truth stands above the noise. America can raise tariffs, print money, and rally allies. But without China's minerals, its machines stop, its tech slows, and its future dims. And in this silent war of resources, Power doesn't belong to the loudest voice. It belongs to the one that controls what the world cannot live without. Most of the world's untouched reserves are now held within China's closest allies, the BRICS nations, Brazil, India, and Russia. Together, these countries control nearly every major undeveloped deposit left on Earth. What's more, China doesn't even need to enforce a total export ban to create global panic. Minor bureaucratic delays or a small cut in export quotas are enough to send the market spiraling. That's exactly what happened back in 2010, when Beijing slightly tightened its export system, and prices exploded by nearly 700% in only a few months. Experts now warn that even if a manufactured product includes just a trace amount, as little as 0.1% of Chinese rare earths, Beijing already holds the leverage to sway its global supply. Amid crumbling supply chains and soaring production costs, the real battlefield of modern economics has shifted. It's no longer fought with weapons, but with resources. China now stands as the biggest trade partner for over 120 nations, handling roughly 15% of total global exports. Europe alone relies on about $600 billion worth of Chinese imports each year. Japan and South Korea both depend on China for more than a third of their vital minerals and electronic components. Even India, often seen as Washington's counterweight to Beijing, still buys close to 30% of its imported industrial and pharmaceutical goods from China. So asking these countries to cut ties with China would mean asking them to cripple their own economies. That's why the latest move from Scott Bessant caught even America's allies off guard. In an aggressive attempt to squeeze Beijing, he tied Chinese trade with Russia directly to U.S. sanctions and announced a staggering 500% tariff on Chinese goods. But far from being a masterstroke, it's an act of economic self-destruction. Such a blow would instantly tear apart global supply chains, wreck the U.S. economy, and push Beijing and Moscow into an even tighter embrace. Washington's idea seems simple. Choke Moscow's oil profits and corner China into choosing sides. But the plan collapses under its own contradictions. China has no interest in ending its energy trade with Russia. In fact, it's increasing it. Today, China imports roughly 2.2 million barrels of Russian oil each day, about 40% more than last year, making it Russia's top customer. These flows aren't slowing down, they're growing. Almost all payments are now processed through UN-based systems or local bank swaps, completely bypassing the US dollar. At the same time, Trump publicly claimed India had agreed to stop purchasing Russian oil, calling it a diplomatic victory. But the data tells a different story. Reuters reports that India still imports about 1.7 million barrels daily, and a growing portion of those deals are being paid in yuan. Since the start of the Ukraine war, the share of Russian oil in India's imports has jumped from 2% to roughly 35%, thanks to discounts of $5 or $7 per barrel below Brent prices, a deal far too good to abandon. While Washington shouts about economic isolation, China and India are quietly tightening their energy partnerships with Moscow. For Russia, that means consistent cash flow. For China, it guarantees low-cost fuel to power its industries. For India, it secures autonomy from Western pressure. Together, they're redrawing the energy map, one that increasingly functions outside the dollar's reach and beyond America's control. And that's where the real trouble begins for the U.S. economy. Gold prices have surged past $4,200 an ounce, jumping more than 5% in just a week, the fastest climb since the COVID crisis. It began right after Trump's tariff announcement, but the true acceleration came once investors grasped the fallout: higher inflation, deeper uncertainty, and inevitable money printing to absorb the shock. As panic spreads, investors are rushing towards safety, and gold has reclaimed its throne as the ultimate safe haven. According to the World Gold Council, global demand has hit historic highs. Central banks collectively bought over 1,100 tons in 2024, the largest accumulation in modern times. Leading this surge are China, India, and Turkey, all steadily cutting back reliance on the US dollar while hoarding physical gold reserves. This isn't just another trade dispute. It's a full-blown transformation of global power. America can still print dollars, but it can't print natural resources, or the trust that once made its currency supreme. The world is shifting toward a system where real assets and strategic alliances define value. Those who command production will dictate the next era. So the question remains, can Washington restore stability before the balance of power moves on for good? Or has a new superpower already stepped into its place?